Hello there guys. A little over a year ago, I made a video examining Native American perspectives on Bigfoot, and how they are often misrepresented by Bigfoot believers. I've been meaning to do a bit of a sequel or addendum to it because I've actually found a bunch of additional research. But I kept putting it off and getting overwhelmed with the workload, so I thought it would be smarter for me to finish a portion of it here, rather than abandon the whole thing. So if you haven't seen that original video, go check that out. One area I had wished I explored a little bit more was the topic of Bigfoot artifacts. Bigfoot believers, or Bigfooters as they sometimes call themselves, will often point to examples of ancient rock art, masks, sculptures, and carvings created by Native Americans or First Nations in the past as eyewitness depictions of something alive and real. This haphazard collection of objects is often used to support the idea that indigenous people in North America saw and interacted with living, breathing Bigfoots, or Sasquatches, long before contact with white settlers. They argue that these images provide strong evidence that an upright walking hairy ape really did or does exist in the forests of North America, and that Bigfoot is not a recent phenomena, but an ancient one. However, as I demonstrated somewhat in the previous video, a lot of these so-called Bigfoot depictions in native art can be easily explained just by asking the Native American artists or their descendants that made them. They can tell us how to interpret the works properly, and typically once they do, the idea that they are supposed to represent anything like our modern idea of Bigfoot fades away. For example, this Haida mask, very popular among Bigfoot believing publications, actually depicts a Gaget or Gagid, which according to Haida folklore is not a Bigfoot, but a human who has barely escaped drowning and lost his or her mind. The idea that this is a depiction of a Bigfoot was something thrust onto the mask long after it was created by primarily non-native white Bigfoot believers who seemingly haven't bothered to ask the Haida or even read any sources on their folklore. Other popular examples like the Zunukwa masks, produced by the Kwakwakiwak, are depictions of the Basket Woman or Basket Ogress, a female monster that should probably be better understood as something closer to a witch or giantess from European folklore. Her large red lips are said to be stained with the blood of the victims she drinks, and they are constantly pursed to blow wind into the trees. Tsunukwa is a single being, not a species, and in the stories, she lives in a house, uses baskets, and creates fire to boil or cook naughty children. In some images that depict her body, she even wears a dress. She's a powerful spiritual being, often paired with a thunderbird in artwork. In her house, she hoards vast riches, nets, canoes, and food, and as a result she is sometimes called the property woman, and her masks are used in potlatches. I feel like all these details kind of refute the idea that she should be interpreted as a Bigfoot in the way we understand it, as a primitive, upright walking hairy ape creature. I could go through many other examples, but for the sake of time, I will focus on just one for this video. One Bigfoot artifact that is often held up as the most compelling of them all is something called the Tsimshian monkey mask or gorilla mask, a strange little artifact currently held at Harvard University's Peabody Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It is a wooden mask carved from red cedar in the guise of a grinning face. According to one source, it was originally painted in red and black, red around the lips, but the paint seems to have faded with time. It is said to have been carved by the Nisga'a branch of the Tsimshian Indians of the Canadian Northwest Coast, and was collected by Lieutenant George Thornton Edmonds, who gifted it to the Peabody Museum not long after. The museum's only accompanying description of the mask, provided by Lieutenant Edmonds himself, rather cryptically describes it as a mythical being mask, representing a mythical being found in the woods called today a monkey. Throughout my research, I encountered this mask several times on Bigfoot-believing websites and books. Due to its ape-like resemblance, some believe the mask itself to be the face of Bigfoot, depicted by a Native American eyewitness. And when I first saw it, I must admit the mask was definitely the most compelling of the bunch Bigfooters have assembled. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed it appeared in the thumbnail of my original Native Bigfoot video, even if at the time I didn't directly address it. It was once described by one Bigfoot believer as the oldest known of its kind, and it falls closest in detail to Bigfoot's own face as described by God-fearing, no-nonsense witnesses. It is the best of its kind. It is science, aptly wed to art. Proponents of this interpretation have often seen this mask and asked, how could the Nishka have depicted an ape so accurately if they had never seen one before? Or, had they? Maybe the Nishka artist really did see an ape in the forest of British Columbia. Is this the face of Bigfoot? Well, I think the answer to that question might be less exciting than some people want it to be. First off, it should be clarified that this mask is by no means an ancient artifact. The history of the Tsimshian monkey mask is poorly documented. We don't know when exactly it was produced, or by who. Nonetheless, it is still an irrefutably young artifact. At the earliest, it was made sometime around 1850 or 1860, long after the Nishka started having contact with Europeans. Because of this recent and uncertain date of creation, it calls into question just how isolated the Native American artist that made this mask was from the wider world. I think it is entirely possible they could have seen a photo or a drawing of an ape carried by a white visitor and decided to incorporate it into the design of the mask. The history book, Soft Gold, includes a section on the mask and says this: monkeys appeared on the northwest coast as seamen's pets in the first half of the 19th century and were represented in a number of carvings, notably on argillite pipes. By the time this mask, with its monkey or ape-like features, was carved, probably at the turn of the century, many Tsimshian had seen monkeys, and most were probably familiar with them through pictures and descriptions. Notable Bigfoot believer Christopher L. Murphy even concedes this point in his own book, Meet the Sasquatch. Other than Sasquatch, the only plausible explanation for the source of the image is a pet monkey brought to North America by an early European sailor. Yet another source admits that the creature of the mask is likely to be a recent or post-contact invention. Treating the Tsimshian monkey mask like an ancient artifact from a totally uncontacted people who could never have known what an ape or monkey looked like is misleading, to say the least. By the time it was created, the Nishka had been interacting and trading with European colonists for over 50 years, and in all likelihood were familiar with monkeys. That being said, I think there might be an even simpler explanation. In my opinion, we only think the mask's face represents a monkey or an ape because we already know what those things look like and are primed to see them. My theory is that the mask might simply be a caricature of a human face that just so happens to look like an ape. When someone starts exaggerating features on a person's face, it can invariably start to look ape-like, because, well, humans are apes and already look a lot like them. This ancient clay face of the Mesopotamian monster Humbaba looks a bit like an ape as well, but its creators likely never saw any apes other than humans. And from written records, we know that Humbaba wasn't an ape, but a mythical giant with a face composed of intestines. The grotesque masks of ancient Greek theater can also look rather unintentionally ape-like. I'm sure had these objects been found in North America, instead of Europe or the Middle East, they would have been used by Bigfoot believers as strong evidence as well. In truth, these are the faces of mythical beings, or caricatures, done for comedic or monstrous effect. They are imaginary faces, not realistic depictions of something that really existed. I think it is possible that this may have been the case with the Tsimshian monkey mask as well. But that's just my outsider interpretation. Because the collector of the mask, Lieutenant Emmons, didn't record its context or meaning in depth, we will likely never know exactly what the original artist had intended, which is a huge shame. But I felt like the next best method to understand it would be to ask the modern Nishka for their opinions on this infamous mask and the alleged Bigfoot interpretation. I decided to send an email to the director of the Nishka Language and Culture Doctorate, Esther Adams, and senior researcher Nita Morvan. Their generous response to me goes as follows. It's too bad that some of these collectors, Emmons and Newton, did not record sufficiently the specifics in regard to the Sem-Ugit and Wilp owners. I did check our files here, nil. To be noted, there are others of these masks belonging to more than one tribe. I believe I saw one from the Raven tribe and one for Eagle. What this signifies, I'm not sure. In one of the catalogued information, The Nisga'a word used in reference to such masks is Bik'is, or Bik'is, meaning to be naughty. Children were or are often referred to as being Bik'is. Then after learning English in the outside world, they began to apply this term monkey to interpret Bik'is. So there you have it. From a member and scholar of the Nisga'a, the mask might just be a depiction of a naughty person, or Bik'is, and this native word was only later applied to monkeys and apes after the Nisga'a learned of the animal's existence through contact with outsiders. That being said, this Nisga'a word, Bik'is, seemingly associated with masks like this one, did raise an eyebrow for me, and led down a bit of a rabbit hole. Nisga'a and Tsimshian are closely related languages, and after finding an online Tsimshian English dictionary, I discovered the word Bak'was, which can have two meanings: monkey or Sasquatch, as in monkeys live on the other side of the world, and crazy, as in a child is acting crazy or misbehaving. The Tsimshian Bak'was and the Nisga'a Bik'is seem to just be two slightly different ways to say the same word. Now, from my past research into native folklore, I was familiar with another similar sounding word found in the language of the neighboring Kwakwaka'wakw nation. This word was Bak'was or Bak'was. In a book said to be reliable in recording native folklore, Bak'was is said to be a supernatural being who lurks on the edges of forests and near streams, hoping to lure the souls of those who drown, or unwitting humans, to eat his ghost food, which causes them to become otherworldly like him. He is the wild man of the woods, the keeper of drowned souls. Those souls captured by Bak'was are condemned to eternal hunger, misery, wandering, and evil-doing. The discontented spirits of drowned souls sometimes accompany Bak'was, and he is closely related to the spirit world where the dead reside. Accompanying this description in this book was a photo of a, quote, Bak'was mask that bore an uncanny resemblance to the one we have been investigating, with the same grinning teeth and deep-set eyes. When I visited the Denver Art Museum, I also saw a very similar green Bak'was mask dated to 1968. According to the book, Bak'was's gaunt skeletal appearance resembles a man dying of starvation. This physical appearance likely reflects the being's curse of eternal hunger. In other books, I also found references to being called Peakish or Pighish among the Gitsan, and the Pikvus of the Hail Tusk. This Pighish is described as an animal closely associated with the land otter. All these words sound linguistically similar to the Bik'is of the Nisga'a, and I theorize they almost certainly all share a common origin, with Pighish, Pikvish, Bikish, Bawis, Bak'was, and Bak'was being slightly different regional pronunciations of more or less the same word. Reading through the ethnographic accounts, the beings are described very similar as well, heavily associated with drowning and death. And here's the thing, basically every indigenous tribe or nation of coastal British Columbia seems to have their own version of this sinister entity. In addition to the aforementioned ones, there is the Gagit or Gagid of the Haida, and the Kusaka or Kushtaka, or land otter men of the Tlingit. The Gagid and the Kushtaka are both described as the transformed state of a soul of a dead, usually drowned human, equally at home in water and on land, with great powers of illusion and disguise, and exhibiting a combination of human and otter features. They are collectors of souls and are typically regarded as malevolent, able to transform or corrupt unlucky humans into additional Gagit or Kushtaka, continuing the cycle. Again, it seems like all 7 of these words are names that describe a similar, if not the same spiritual being shared by these different nations. In the same way Zeus and Jupiter, or Neptune and Poseidon, are more or less the same gods by a different name. And this is something backed up by ethnographic research. Now, a couple of these words have appeared on Bigfoot-believing lists of supposed Native American Sasquatch names: Bak'was, Gagit, and land otter men or Kusaka. However, it should be stressed that the descriptions of these beings don't sound much like Bigfoot or Sasquatch once you get past the surface level. They are spiritual beings, known primarily for their magical ability to possess and transform other humans, as well as shapeshift into people and animals. They are also strongly linked to water and the ocean, spending a good portion of their time underwater. Some Native American elders I have interviewed have explicitly taken offense to some of these names appearing on Bigfoot lists. The Kusaka or Kushtaka sometimes translated as the gender-neutral land otter people of the Tlingit, has been used by some Bigfoot believers as a Native American word for Bigfoot, notably by famous YouTuber Bob Gimlin. In his video Kusaka, Tlingit Bigfoot, Bob Gimlin presents the narrative that the Tlingit people in the past saw and encountered hairy, upright walking apes relatively commonly, and because they didn't know what an ape was, they used the phrase land otter men as the closest way to describe these creatures. He argues that the otter part of land otter men is simply an analogy and should not be taken literally.
But the Tlingit people viewed Kushtaka in a very real regard, and labeling Bigfoot as Otter Man actually makes a lot of sense. Europeans in North America have referred to Bigfoot as a man-ape, but the Tlingit word for ape is Kushtaka, so Otter Man is a linguistic attempt to describe what an ape is. Otter, man, equals Bigfoot. Makes sense to me. This is compelling and remarkable, and really shouldn't be ignored. But of course it is. And yes, if you look up Kushtaka, you will find folkloric depictions of an unlikely being. But is that what the Tlingit said? Or is that how the white men interpreted it? It's hard to say.
However, from my research, this is certainly not the case. In the book Understanding Northwest Coast Art, land otter men are described like this. In northern cultures, land otter is the most powerful of all guardian spirits and spirit helpers. People believe that land otters were originally human, and so possess all the knowledge and power of both species. Land otter is traditionally associated with shamans in their practices. Among northern groups, the land otter was the only animal a hunter must never kill. The taboo resulted from the belief that human souls are often transformed into land otters, and perhaps also the belief that of all the animal forms, a shaman is most likely to assume that of a land otter. The most greatly feared form of death is drowning. Land otters use trickery to capsize canoes and acquire the souls of the drowned travelers, carrying them off to the spirit world and transforming them gradually into land otter people, destined only to cause harm, wander disconsolately, and prey on human souls. A publicly available Tlingit dictionary, edited by a scholar of Tlingit descent, describes land otter people like this: a person who has been lured by the Kushta to run with them and become trapped between human and a land otter, a state that requires powerful ceremonies to fully return from. By the way, a Kushta in the Tlingit language is an otter, land otter, or river otter, so someone who has been taken by a Kushta becomes a Kushtaka, a land otter person. This so-called land otter pole at the Denver Art Museum in Colorado was carved by the Haida woodcarver Dwight Wallace in 1870. The Haida and Tlingit people are closely related and share many beliefs, one of them being the belief in land otter men, which the Haida seem to call Gagid. The museum's official description of the pole describes it like this: this pole, carved by Dwight Wallace, is known as the land otter pole. It tells the story of a man who barely escaped capture by land otters after his canoe was capsized. The figure at the top may represent the shipwrecked man holding a club in one hand and a land otter's tail in the other. Below him, the humanoid figures represent the land otters, who have the ability to transform into human beings and appear as the man's relatives. I'm not an expert, but if these are supposed to be the land otters, they appear to be transforming magically from human beings into otters and back into human beings. From this variety of native sources, land otter people, or Kushtaka, seem to be best understood as transformed humans whose souls now take the form of otters. They live in the ocean and occasionally capsize ships, drowning sailors and fishermen, turning them into land otter men as well. They are also shapeshifters that can take the form of both humans and animals. A close analogy to European folklore might be something like a mix between a werewolf, a vampire, and a siren or mermaid, or to Japanese folklore, a kappa, but perhaps even these comparisons aren't completely accurate. For this video, I managed to contact a Tlingit artist by the name of James Johnson, and ask his opinion on people interpreting Kushtaka as Bigfoot, sending him a link to Bob Gimlin's Tlingit Bigfoot video. His response in an email to me went as follows: "Thank you for your email. Tlingit Bigfoot is close to an insult to our culture. Perceiving our culture, stories, and even our language through Western philosophy isn't the correct ideology to understand Tlingit history. Land otter man are directly related to Tlingit shamanism. Souls that drowned and bodies that were not cremated properly became land otters. transformation occurred between human and animal readily. Shamans would use the spirit of land otters to help try and recover lost souls. Interpreting Kushtaka, or land otter men, as Bigfoots or Sasquatches displays a huge lack of understanding of Tlingit beliefs. It is hard to see how anyone could get this interpretation from reading Native American sources or talking with them directly. And Tlingit viewers have tried to tell Bob this in the comments section. I'm full-blooded Tlingit. The real name for it is Kushtaka. It comes from my native language. Land otter men is what it means, because it can dive into water exactly like an otter. It'll pull you into water, or lead you into the mountains, making you think it's anyone you know, like your friends or family. And once it has you, you're no longer the same. You're no longer living, but you're not really dead either. You're simply a Kushtaka. But for some reason they hate tobacco. Once you pull out a cigarette and light it, they just disappear. Unfortunately, this video, and its inaccurate interpretation of Tlingit beliefs, has spread to other Bigfoot believing sources that often repeat and parrot what it says, without doing their own research. And it's a huge shame, and sadly pretty common behavior in the Bigfoot community. I'm not trying to pick a fight with anyone, I'm just pointing out something that I think deserves some criticism. I digress. Back to the mask that started this deep dive. From my research, I have learned that this mask created by an unknown Nisga'a artist in the mid to late 1800s likely depicts a Bik'is, the Nisga'a version of a well-known spirit found in the indigenous folklore of northwest coastal Canada. This being goes by many names depending on the tribe: Bak'was, Gagat, Kushtaka, Land Otter Man, but they all describe more or less the same thing: a semi-aquatic, shape-shifting collector of souls associated with drowning, the ocean, otters, and starvation. They are often understood as being originally human, but transformed through death, typically when the body of a person is not properly put to rest, when it is lost at sea. This mask is likely intended to depict the gaunt, starved, and skeletal appearance of this being, with grinning teeth and sunken eyes, which in turn unintentionally gave it an ape-like or monkey-like appearance. I theorize that after contact with white settlers, the Nisga'a learned of monkeys, and perhaps noticing the resemblance they had to these Bik'is masks, started to use this word, originally describing an evil spirit, to refer to the new and foreign animals, gradually changing the word's meaning. Alternatively, the mask could have been directly influenced by pet monkeys brought by white sailors in the 19th century. This Nisga'a artist may have intentionally created the mask to resemble those monkeys, explaining the ape-like features. It's hard to say which of these explanations are correct, but I think either explanation is far more likely than the mask being an eyewitness depiction of a living, breathing Bigfoot or Sasquatch. In short, in my opinion, this is almost certainly not the face of Bigfoot. Linking this mask to the modern cryptid was a later invention, a reinterpretation that came about in the late 1950s and 60s, when the hairy ape man idea of Bigfoot started to gain a lot of attention in pop culture. The resemblance appears to be entirely coincidental. I think the Bigfoot interpretation grossly oversimplifies the mask's complicated context and history, and requires a deeper understanding of Native American concepts of life, death, and the spirit world, and also how languages, beliefs, and the meaning of words can gradually change and shift over time. Using this mask and similar objects to support the existence of Bigfoot is incorrect in my opinion, and at times misrepresents the intentions of the artists that made them in the first place. So please just be respectful, do in-depth research, and ask before you make claims like this, because it does mean something to someone. And if there's any Nisga'a watching this video right now, and you think I got something very wrong about the mask, please tell me in the comment section. I tried my best to get answers, but I very well could have missed something or overgeneralized. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.